May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, for you are our strength and our Redeemer. I grew up in a family where nearly everybody was involved in one way or another in the building trade. And in my childhood, I got brought along on all these job sites to see some really neat houses and some really shoddily built ones at the same time. I remember seeing built-ins that were so complex. One that sticks out in my mind is a bookcase that would move out of the way in a library, and behind it was a butler's pantry that led into the kitchen. Nobody would know it was there unless you knew just where to push. That's real craftsmanship. The kind of craftsmanship that we expect to see in homes that we invest our good hard-earned money in. But that's not always the case, because in some of those other ones, I remember seeing, well, moldings that didn't quite line up, and substandard materials that would be used, and it really would make for a headache later on. Because although on the surface, the veneers of everything looked okay at the time, with a little bit of time, those things came apart. And you got to see what those things really were made from. As a phrase that was said commonly when I was a child rings in my head, plaster and paint make a job what it ain't. But unfortunately, even the best constructed homes, if given the ravages of time and termites and traffic, you find that those houses also begin to decay. Because everything in this creation is passing. Everything in this creation has an expiration date, whether we realize it or not. Man's construction is not permanent. Which leads me to the character of Abraham, featured in 2 of today's lessons. Abram, the man of the East, who grows up in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. I'd like to give you a little snapshot of the life of Abraham and how God works his purposes in him from a place where he could not be used to a place where he could be used. Ur of the Chaldeans, a metropolitan city, a wealthy place, and a place that was absolutely rife with corruption. In fact, the theological world in those days was Sumerian gods and goddesses. And there was a belief, and archaeologists have confirmed this through discovery of cuneiform tablets and also through discovery of skeletons, that they believed that a good life could be had if they could just get the demons to stop from tormenting them. And so they believed that the way that you did that would be to have extra babies who then would be killed and put at the foundations of your home. Imagine what Abraham is called out of. A city that doesn't make any sense. A city that is really, really corrupt. But there's some stability that can be found even in the most corrupt circumstances, because we think at least it'll last, right? And then God, I should say a most peculiar thing, that Abram gets the concept of one God and not many in that situation. He is called to leave Ur of the Chaldeans for a promised land that he had never seen. And so he goes completely across the desert, going from what is on the Persian Gulf in modern-day Iraq. We do know where Ur of the Chaldeans is. We have studied what's left of it. And then he goes to a place called Canaan, completely on the other side of the desert, western, at the banks of the Mediterranean Sea. And here, the land is not unoccupied. It's not like Abram gets a blank slate in which to work. He finds that already there are civilizations there. And they are not what we commonly think of as being the Canaanites. We read the Bible stories, and because they're written with a certain tone, we seem to understand that somehow the Canaanites must have been really backward people. Well, they had cities. They had constructions. They were well built, is what archaeologists tells us. And here Abram comes in a tent. The juxtaposition of these two realities is intense. One seems to be permanent and yet is passing, and the other seems to be passing and yet is permanent. In the midst of this journey, Abram becomes Abraham because he has a covenant made with him. And in this covenant, he is promised two titles. Two incredible titles. One, he is called the Father of the Nations, which means that the success of the world will hinge upon his progeny. But also, he is called Friend of God. And he brings nothing permanent into the equation. He does not construct anything himself, but he has the things that can be built upon as blocks for the future. And that thing is faith. The kingdom of heaven is not built with bricks and mortar, but it is built with the faith of the people who say that we believe in one God. And it is those things that will bear the test of time when all of this is again returned to ash and history. And what he can give us in the midst of that journey, when we are learning, like Abraham, to go from things that are faithless to things that are faith-filled, to go from things that seem to be permanent and yet are passing to things that are passing away and yet yield something permanent, then we can get three things from this journey. One is power. Now, we're not talking about the power of this world that constructs things that don't last. We're talking about the power of the world to come, which knows how to bank in heaven. Jesus talks about this in the gospel lesson. We can bank ahead of heaven, whereas something that we can't do here on this earth. No matter what we do in this life, it will perish with us. One thing endures, and that is the faith that we have sown into eternity. The building blocks of heaven. So we'll get power to see something that really lasts, something that will go into eternity. The second thing is we will have perspective. We will have the ability to see God on God's terms and not what we think we can have in the here and now. So power, perspective, and the third key word is perseverance. When we see that God works through the equation of faith and not through man's construction, we are able to see that what God promises, God will deliver. We may be like those in the Old Covenant who, as Hebrews 11 says, placed their trust in him, although they had not seen the promise. Or we can be those who have faith in the fact that what God promises, he always delivers, even though we may not see it, except by faith. These were the lenses that Abram worked with. These were the lenses that Abram became Abraham with. These are the lenses with which the church today is called, in a very uncertain time, to look into the reality in which we live. I don't think we can turn on NBC, ABC, C-SPAN, Fox News, wherever it is that you get your news from, and see a world that makes much sense right now. We see that man's construction is falling all the time. Wouldn't it be a lot nicer and make a lot more sense if we could invest then in structures that are from everlasting? If you want to do that, I ask you to place your faith as a matter of building. For that which we purchase with our hard-earned dollars will perish with us. But that which we purchase with faith, by trusting God as He is, will last forever. So if you want this power, this perseverance, then I ask you to do that. Find your trust in the kingdom of God and not in the kingdom of man's construction. For it is there that no moth invades and rust does not destroy, and there no thief breaks in and steals. There it's permanent, and you can bank